Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, I provided my opening salutations at the earlier presentation, so in light of your agenda and the important work here, if you don't mind, I'm going to get right into it. I do, with the acknowledgements I made earlier, I do want to acknowledge the drum and the sacred items, and again, always acknowledge the Creator for the life we've been given. I do want to acknowledge the traditional territory in Fort William First Nation, Chief Peter Collins, again, Grand Chief Fiddler and the Executive. And I do want to just note, yesterday there was another exciting announcement, and it was yesterday's announcement with Minister Zimmer in Fort William First Nation and the acknowledgement of the hosting of a new created Indigenous Youth Community Wellness Secretariat. And again, to note that this is the very first time that the provincial government ever opened up an office of that nature in one of our communities. And again, the collaboration and the partnership that took place between Nishnawbe Aski Nation, the Ontario government, Fort William First Nation, and others, the City of Thunder Bay. Again, a testament to the resolve that's been generated here within this assembly for the young people. The Secretary will work closely with Indigenous partners and federal and municipal governments to develop community-driven solutions to support Indigenous youth. These solutions will help them towards recovery, resilience, and wellness. Again, I noted earlier you had a group of young people here standing behind the new name of Aski. Again, the spirit of the youth in NAN are very, very strong, and again, a testament to the leadership. I do know that the leadership, the youth, the elders in this room will welcome the community-based solutions that will be the focus of this new Secretariat. We need our children and our youth to remain in our communities. We need our children and our youth to be instilled and educated in our own languages and our own cultures. And that's also a very strong element of what NAN puts forward in their territory. Now more than ever, we must work towards securing a better future for our children and our youth. So the most urgent issue that I've felt I should focus on is the issue of the child welfare crisis. Just 4 days ago, the National Emergency Meeting on Child Welfare wrapped up in Ottawa. Collectively, the provinces and territories refused to sign on to the federal government's 6-point plan to reform child welfare. The provincial ministers stated that they need more time to consult with Indigenous leaders. So again, it was mentioned here, and I'm sure it will continue to be echoed, but the 6 areas that the minister had put forward around this plan were: 1, continuing to work fully to implement all orders from the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal; 2, shifting the current programming focus to prevention and early intervention; 3, working to support communities to draw down jurisdiction in the area of child and family services, including exploring the co-development of federal legislation; 4, supporting Indigenous leadership to advance culturally appropriate reform; 5, developing data and reporting strategies with provinces, territories, and Indigenous partners; and 6, to accelerate the trilateral technical tables that are in place right across the country. And I want to tell you that in Ontario there are multilateral tables that are well underway, and again, the Nishnawbe Aski Nation has proved to be very progressive and very focused in terms of its child welfare agenda. Let me reassure everyone that the Chiefs of Ontario, NAN, and all regions across are working closely with both the provincial and federal governments. And I especially want to congratulate the Nishnawbe Aski Nation team for their hard work in advancing this agenda. While Ontario has yet to sign the 6-point plan, we have a very strong ally in Minister Couteau, the Minister of Children and Youth Services. Not only did he speak at length in our Chiefs Caucus last week, but he stayed behind to assure and answer questions to our technicians. And again, a lot of that is generated out of the push that you've given here to child welfare in your territory. Last Friday as well, Minister Couteau and I issued a joint statement at the conclusion of the National Emergency Meeting. The minister said, and I quote, "In Ontario, we recognize the system of colonialism, colonization, and abuse that generations of Indigenous children and their families have suffered from. We have worked hard to develop strong working relationships with our Indigenous partners, and we are committed to working together to find holistic solutions that put youth young people are the center of decision making, and also addressing racism and the intergenerational trauma, and most importantly, it puts choice back in the hands of the families. As we move forward and we build on these relationships, we must continue to work multilaterally in a new funding arrangement that prioritizes prevention and Indigenous priorities, end quote. So again, some very strong words from the minister, and I must tell you, it is going to be very important that we figure out how to best bring that forward collectively, and at the same time respecting what each of our territories are doing. Let me repeat part of my presentation at Friday morning's First Nations leadership session with the federal and provincial ministers. Canada's child welfare industry has cost First Nations and has affected the vitality of our families' institutions, in many cases irreparably. We need to end this crisis together through displacing colonial child welfare industry completely with our own child welfare systems, structures, and laws, and healing strategies. We've lost many to suicide, we've lost them to the streets, the missing, the murdered, we've lost them to jails, prisons, and far too many of our people are rotting away their lives because their childs have been appropriated. They simply do not know who they are. First Nations have faced generations of oppression and abuse because of paternalistic attitudes and policies from both the federal and provincial governments. Residential school, the 60s scoop, the millennial scoop, all examples of policies and practices put in place to help us, but did the exact opposite. The sinister origins of church and state to take children and assimilate them was all part of the engineered colonial conquest. It has us fighting to fix essentially a national crime today. The child welfare system continues to maintain practices of separating our children from their families and their communities. And the current child welfare system is not a system to protect our children, but is an industry built on pain and suffering of our children and families. It's a system that looks at our children like they're commodities. Our communities are ready for change and are ready to take back control when it comes to their children and families. For example, Grand Council Treaty 3 has their own child welfare law. Nishnawbe, Abenoji, and Nakamagewin. The Nishnawbe Nation has their process in place in implementing their child well-being law as well. We are looking to change how child well-being matters are handled in our communities. Wikwemekong Unceded Indian Reserve has a community model that focuses on supporting children and their families, and are prepared to implement it with their proper supports in place. Oneida, one of the larger communities in southern Ontario, is ready to create a system where their children never leave their community and stay with families and extended family and the community as a circle. Nishnawbe Aski Nation is advocating for the needs of the remote north and developing a funding formula to show the true cost of delivering services in the remote communities. There are a number of grassroots solutions as well in our communities, and many are ready to take the next step and take the opportunities that are out there. I just want to state that, about a year and a half ago, it was on a weekend, and the Grand Chief was just heading out to take some time for himself and his family, and he called me up and he said, listen, we would like to obtain standing in the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal. And I thought about it, and I didn't hesitate. I said, absolutely. And since that time, this leadership has said, listen, we have very distinct issues in the remote north. We must be on the record, and we must be able to address the need with the appropriate formulas for spending. So again, I wanted to state publicly that I still support that, and it's very important that we continue to do so. As you know, Canada has appealed the last three CHRT rulings. The very good news is that on Thursday, 2 days from now, Canada will comply with the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal rulings. I can't get into any details, but what I can say is that Indigenous Services Minister Jane Philpott is willing to live up to her word, and she's vowed to end the child welfare crisis. She has vowed to return children to their families. The next immediate step will be an Ontario All Chiefs meeting with Minister Philpott and Minister Couteau to be held on or before the first week of March, within the next month or so. As soon as the details are confirmed, Chiefs, we'll make sure that we get that information out to you. But I can tell you this, that one of the things that we said going into the national meeting was that you need to recognize the multilateral dynamics in the Ontario region, and if there is a trilateral opportunity going forward, we must get that commitment. We did get that commitment from both the feds and the provinces, so we are going to be a lead region across the country. And again, I'll state again, it's all in part, as to what NAN and other regions are doing. So in the meantime, there are a number of other pressing issues and priorities that must be dealt with in months to come. Chiefs, I wish I had the time to go through a long list, and I don't, so I'm going to just go into a few of them here and kind of pull my commentary in, and I'll make a couple suggestions when I conclude my remarks. The legalization of cannabis is just a mere 5 months away. On July 1st, 2018, it is very accurate to say that First Nations have not been provided the opportunity to study all the impacts that this will have in our communities. These impacts include health, social, public safety, and economic impacts and opportunities. Some communities may embrace the opportunity to benefit from the production and sale of cannabis. Some may ban the sale of cannabis in their communities. However, all of the communities must protect our youth from the dangerous side effects of cannabis, even if it's natural cannabis and a mind-altering drug. And it can be causing long-term damage to our young people. As the co-chair of the AFN's National Task Force on Cannabis, I'm working closely with Quebec Labrador Regional Chief Ghislain Picard. Our first meeting will be held in the Nishnawbe territory in coming weeks, and again, we will get all that information out to you. Furthermore, because there was not effective consultation with the Attorney General's office, we've got issues and concerns and questions regarding enforcement. And how do we deal with the potential of pushing back against legislation and the policies coming from the province on the distribution of cannabis? Those are big questions, and I know that Nishnawbe Aski Nation also has those questions. So we will be looking to bring those to the surface, and more communication will happen quite rapidly in the next couple of weeks. The theme of this year's first ever summit on getting the relationship right, it's our health governance, and it's the era of reconciliation. Besides our own leadership and the health technicians, the provincial and federal representatives from across the country will be in attendance. So again, we are having that on the 13th and 14th of February. The ultimate goal of that is to look at First Nation health transformation and looking at getting those systems and the control of health back in the hands of our people and in our communities. Again, I'm under no illusion here that the issue of health is so important to your territory that Nishnawbe Aski Nation has a lot of innovative approaches as to how to do more with less. And our work in the next while, as you're going through your transformation exercise, we'll need to focus in on the fiscal and the funding aspect, but how do we wrestle away that jurisdiction and put it into our communities in such a way where it creates immediate health impacts for our people? Happy, healthy communities will only be created when we address the determinants of health: proper housing, clean water, affordable and healthy foods. And again, I want to make the tie here in my comments that Minister Jane Philpott has 5 priority areas, and the 6 pillars within her child welfare agenda, they're tied right into her overall 5 priorities. And she has committed to opening up a table on the determinants of well-being. We've often heard that we can't just deal with child welfare from the perspective of getting funding and the issue of protection and prevention, but it has to do with education. It has to do with having water in the community, affordable, adequate housing. She knows, being a doctor and somebody who has a very important agenda in front of her, that this whole discussion around the social determinants of health needs to open up. And I will definitely continue to support Nishnawbe Aski Nation as it continues to push on that part of the agenda. Less than 2 weeks ago, the Prime Minister was here in your territory. He saw firsthand the challenges faced by the people in Piganjicum. He also saw the solutions. Now it's time to implement them. I just want to say, Chiefs, that there are a lot of things on the agenda. The National Chief spoke about the issue of funding. He talked about the 3 tables. I want to let you know that today there's going to be a document released. You will be getting that, and it has to do with the 3 tables, and it has to do with the overall broad discussion of advancing our nations. Listen, we cannot have the status quo. It's not just going to be money, but it's going to be control, and it's going to be having the systems and the laws from your communities and your territories respected in those processes, like education, like economy, respect for treaties, and so on and so forth. I just want to say that I've got 1 minute left, Mr. Chair, and I'm actually going to wrap up before the 1 minute's done. And I do want to again say that my support and acknowledgement to the leadership of the NAN executive and all the chiefs here, to the elders, to the young people, to the women, to those frontline workers and everybody that works hard for your communities. Thank you, and again on behalf of the other chiefs, great work, and again, have a good assembly. Be blessed.